Welcome to Thought Gum, where we provide the thoughts and you chew it over. Our Earth is old, very old, and contrary to what some people may think, the Bible does teach that the Earth is old as well. The Bible does paint us a clear picture of a very old world that God created and a very clear picture of a world that He destroyed. Why did God destroy it? Let's find out right now. This is the story of our ancient Earth. Now, we've all heard it before, God creating the world in 6 days and resting on the seventh day. This is written in the very first chapter of the very first book of the Bible called Genesis. Well, here is a recap. On day 1, God divided the light from darkness. On the second day, He created the atmosphere. On the third day, He made bodies of water and plant life. On the fourth day, He made the stars, the sun, the moon, the planets, and all the heavenly bodies. On the fifth day, He made the birds and the fish. On the sixth day, animals and mankind. And of course, on the seventh day, God rested. The story of the 6 days of creation is very famous and is well known around the world by believers and non-believers alike. Something that is not as well known is the Genesis gap. Now, what is the Genesis gap? Now, in the beginning of the book of Genesis, the scriptures give us a description of a specific period of time that occurred before the 6 days of creation. This is the Genesis gap. It is in this period of time that the Bible gives the reader a picture of an ancient world. This ancient world is on the same earth that we're on right now, but in a different age. So what is an age exactly? Simply put, an age is just a period of time that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. There are 3 distinct periods of time or ages mentioned in the Bible, and they go as follows. The first world age is where God created the heaven and the earth and then would later destroy it. We will get into the details of what this age looked like and why God destroyed it in just a moment. The second world age is the age we're living in now. The first world age ended and the second world age began when God divided the light from the darkness. The second world age that we're in right now will end when Christ returns to the earth to set up His millennial kingdom. Then the second world age ends at the end of Christ's millennial kingdom with the great white throne judgment. This ushers in the third world age, which is the eternity where God creates a new heaven and a new earth for all His children to live in. Now, you may be saying to yourself, I've never heard about these 3 world ages before. Or, I've never read this before. Or maybe you're thinking, my pastor never mentioned this to me. And I definitely know some of you are thinking that the Bible doesn't teach this at all. That's for sure. There are many that will criticize what I'm saying here. Most of these critics, if not all of them, are yeks. What's a yek? A yek is just a cute little nickname for young Earth creationist. You know, the people that say the Earth is thousands of years old? Basically, the yek believes that the Bible says that the Earth is young and that science also proves that the Earth is young. Also, not all, but many yeks accuse other Bible believers of twisting scriptures if you disagree with them. Now, the yeks' beliefs regarding the age of the Earth are pure garbage, and I'm going to prove it. We're going to take a closer look at what the yek believes and then compare it to the 3 world ages. First, we need to go to the source. Let's go to the book of Genesis and read this together. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, Let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness He called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. So in short, the yeks take the first 5 verses of Genesis and tries to make it all fit into day 1, where God divided the light from the darkness. The yek states that day 1 is the starting point of all creation, and that nothing existed before the 6 days of creation, therefore completely removing the existence of the first Earth age. Essentially, the yek believes in 2 world ages, the age we are living in now, that started with the 6 days of creation and the eternity. The Yek believes that Satan's fall happened after the 6 days of creation, which then led to sin and death being brought into the world. Now, if we study and rightly divide the word like 2 Timothy instructs us to do, and apply just a bit of logic here, we will see that the scenario that the Yeks believe is completely wrong, and just a traditional teaching of men and not sound biblical doctrine. The Yeks are very quick to shout out Bible verses and attack any opposition to their beliefs, but their beliefs have so many holes in it that it's pretty easy to destroy. And I'm not going to attack the Yeks personally, but I will attack the Yeks' beliefs and show you why it's absolutely impossible to fit the first 5 verses of Genesis into day 1. Let's go back to the first 5 verses of Genesis and break this down verse by verse. The first verse reads, Genesis 1:1, "In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth." Period. I'm putting an emphasis on this period over here because I want you to stop and grasp the simplicity of this statement. The heaven and the earth were already created, and it didn't say when it was created. Simply that there was a starting point and that they were created. Let's just clarify here. Planet Earth was created along with heaven, and remember, heaven is just the space surrounding the earth. Now the next verse is going to give us the crucial details that we can use to see a clear picture of what the earth looked like. Genesis 1:2, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." Stop. Let's break this down. So what do we know so far? We know from verse 1 the earth and the heaven are made. We read that the earth is in a condition that is without form and void. We see darkness is there, and darkness is also upon the face of the deep. We see that God's Spirit is there, and we see water is mentioned. Now, let's paint a picture. Now, with a bit of logical deduction, cross-referencing, and some reverse engineering, we can paint a very accurate picture here. Let's start with the planet Earth. Now, verse 1 tells us the earth is made, so what did it look like during verse 2? Well, let's find out. Verse 2 mentions the face of the deep. When we cross-reference the word deep here with other times it's used in the Bible, we see that it refers to very deep bodies of water like oceans and seas. Specifically, the lower section of deep bodies of water, the waters near the seabed and far from the surface. The very fact that the word deep is used here gives us some insight that most would overlook. In order for a body of water to be described as deep, it must have 3 characteristics. It must have a surface, it must have a bottom, and the bottom has to be very far from that surface. So the use of the word deep here is very specific and helps us in part to paint a picture that tells us that there was lots of water and that there's land at the bottom of that water. Now, if you recall, it was on the 3rd day that God commanded the waters to move and let the dry land appear, which would then bring about plant life. Let's read it. Genesis 1:9, "And God said, Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so." 10, "And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good." On the 3rd day, God didn't create the landmass on the earth. No soil, no rocks, no mountains or land was created on the 3rd day, and God didn't mention any water being created either. Because of the use of the word deep in Genesis 1:2, we know that both land and water were already there on the 3rd day. God simply commanded the waters to move, which in turn revealed the land underneath it, which was already there. Remember, there's land at the bottom of the water too, but only dry land appeared. The key word here is dry. Therefore, it implies that the land that appeared was wet before God moved the waters that covered it. Don't overlook this fact, because now this gives us a clear picture that the earth was completely engulfed and covered in water. Another way of saying this is that the earth was completely flooded, but more on that later. We can also add more to the picture. Remember in verse 2, it also tells us that God was there and that his spirit was hovering over the waters that were surrounding the earth. It also says that darkness was there and that it was upon the face of the deep as well. Now let's read Genesis chapter 1 verses 3 to 5 and get more details about the darkness that is mentioned in verse 2. Genesis 1:3, "And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, and that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day." Now, depending on the context, darkness could be used in multiple ways, but at its root, darkness means an absence of light. Now, light in the physical sense is simply electromagnetic radiation that is visible. But at its root, light means something that makes vision possible or brings illumination. The light and darkness mentioned on this first day here cannot be referring to physical light or darkness. Why? Because if you remember, God didn't create the physical light until the fourth day. The sun, the moon, the stars, the planets, the heavenly bodies, and everything that we see in the daytime sky, the nighttime sky, anything in the world that gives physical light didn't exist yet until God made them on the fourth day. So on this first day, God couldn't have created the 24-hour day with 12 hours of physical light and 12 hours of physical darkness, because that requires the sun to be in existence to be used as a light source and as an instrument to measure time. Nothing was created on this first day. God let light illuminate darkness, and then he gave light and darkness names. He named them. He named light day and he named darkness night. So when God said let there be light, it cannot be speaking about any physical light or physical darkness, which once again means absence of light. So what is this light here, and what did it illuminate? The Bible interprets itself, and with some cross-referencing, we see that this can only be speaking about light and darkness as a figure of speech in a spiritual sense by using allegory and symbolism. This is an easy concept to grasp because we see light and darkness used in figures of speeches all the time. Are you confused? A lot of you may be in the dark here, but I'll help shed some light on the subject. You see what I did there? Over and over again, the Bible uses the concept of light and darkness to teach. Many times, light and darkness are used to represent moral good and moral evil, enlightenment and ignorance or lack of knowledge, sight and blindness, and sometimes, but rarely, it means blessings and curses or peace and affliction. Many times, light and darkness are used to teach concepts for good and evil. For example, in Isaiah 5:20, God said, "Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." Also in Proverbs 4, "The way of the wicked is as darkness, they know not at what they stumble." When Jesus spoke about himself, he said in John 12:46, "I am come a light into the world, that whosoever believeth on me should not abide in darkness." And again in John 8:12, "Then spake Jesus unto them, saying, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life." When Jesus spoke to Paul, Paul was given the reason why he was being sent to spread the gospel to the nations. In Acts 26:18, Jesus says it was to open their eyes and to turn them from darkness to light, from the power of Satan unto God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and inheritance among them which are sanctified by faith that is in me. Even Paul used light and darkness in a figure of speech. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 5, Paul says, "For we preach not ourselves, but Christ Jesus the Lord, and ourselves your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who commanded the light to shine out of darkness, hath shined in our hearts to give the light of knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ." And again, Paul in 1 Thessalonians, "Ye are children of the light and children of the day. We are not of the night, nor of the darkness." There are many more examples in God's Word where we see light and darkness used as figures of speech to represent good and evil. Just like darkness means absence of light, evil means absence of good. This is simple to understand but an enormously important concept and cannot be overlooked because we now understand that the darkness mentioned in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 can only be talking about evil. And the Bible makes one thing very clear. God is not the author and inventor of evil. God didn't bring moral evil into existence. Satan did. Satan is the one who brought moral evil into existence, not God. God is holy, and by his very nature, God cannot sin or commit an evil act. God is morally perfect, and no darkness can come from God. This is made very clear in 1 John chapter 1 verse 5, where it reads, "This then is the message we have heard of him, and declare unto you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all." And it's clearly written that God cannot be evil in James chapter 1 verse 13. "Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man." The reason this is so important is because it reveals to us that before God said, "Let there be light" on the first day, and before the 6 days of creation even began, evil existed. Therefore, if evil is present on the earth before the first day, and Satan is the one who brought darkness into existence, then common sense tells us that Satan must have been there before the first day of creation as well. Are you starting to see why young earth creationism is not biblical at all? Are you starting to see why the Yek's beliefs about nothing existing before the 6 days of creation kinda makes no sense? If they claimed God was alone and nothing existed before the 6 days of creation, then explain how darkness got there and is present with God, when we know there is no darkness in God. The Yeks have no explanations for this, so the Yeks have no choice but to say that light and darkness mentioned in Genesis chapter 1 verses 1 to 5 doesn't mean good and evil, and invent another interpretation for light and darkness. The Yeks' problem is that any other interpretation just doesn't work. It won't be biblical, and it won't align with any of the other examples given in the Bible when light and darkness are used as figures of speech. The Yeks can't say that the light and the darkness are physical light and darkness because they weren't created until the 4th day. The Yeks can't say light and darkness means enlightenment or ignorance because, remember, the Yeks say God was alone before the 6 days of creation. So to say that darkness means some form of ignorance or lack of wisdom is wrong because God is all-knowing. And the Yeks really can't say it means curses or affliction because if the Yeks say God is alone before the 6 days of creation, then who is there that God would have to punish for doing wrong? It doesn't make any sense. The darkness mentioned in the first 5 verses of Genesis can only mean evil and nothing else. I'm glad that I could shed some light on this subject, and I hope you're seeing that it's impossible to fit the first 5 verses of Genesis into day 1 of the 6 days of creation. Now, we still haven't explored without form and void yet, and there's so much more to say on this subject, so make sure you don't miss the next episode. If you like this video, smash that like button. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. And remember to click that subscribe button and hit that bell so you won't ever miss a video. Hope you enjoyed the thoughts. Now chew them over. Till next time, God bless.